Welcome to episode 8 of the iOS and macOS device management series. So far we've looked at configuring and preparing both Apple Business Manager and Microsoft Intune so that we can roll both a macOS device and an iOS device, both of which are supervised. We also looked at BYOD scenario, and we included a restriction or configuration restriction profile and deployed that down to the device. But in this video, I want to look specifically how we use Microsoft Intune to configure OS updates for those devices. So let's jump in. So first off, I want to start over on the Microsoft website where I like to get the latest information. And this is where we're going to look at the Manage macOS software update policies in Intune. Typically, what this is going to show you is it shows you effectively what updates you're going to get. Now we can see here that with macOS you're going to get the critical updates, firmware, configuration file and others, including OS and built-in apps. Now you won't always get new features, so sometimes it's bug updates and sometimes it is new features, but generally speaking you're going to get a mix of these within your updates. And the key thing to note really is that for macOS updates in Intune, you can remotely manage how downloads, installations and notifications should occur. And the way that we're going to configure this is effectively specify a schedule to determine when the update installs. Now this can be as simple as installing the updates the next time the device checks in, or creating daytime ranges. And what we need to also take note of is the fact that a device will get the update or be notified an update when it checks in, and that typically occurs every 8 hours. So over on my Intune tenant, I'm going to navigate through to devices. I'm going to go to macOS. We're going to look at macOS first, and then you have this option for update policies for macOS. So we'll select that, create a new profile, we'll give it a name. I won't add a description, hit the next, and this is when you're presented with all the different options here. So to start off with on this page, the key points to kind of highlight really are, as it says, this profile doesn't prevent users from updating the OS manually, so they can still go ahead and do that on their own device, but also that the updates only apply to supervised devices. So devices that have been enrolled through Apple Business Manager connected to Intune, that's where these updates are going to apply. We see the different types of updates here as we showed on the Microsoft website, and we can go through all the individual options available. So they're pretty much the same. So you've got not configured, obviously that stands for itself. You've got download and install, which is effectively where you download or install the update depending on the current state. You can download only, which is download the software update without installing it. Install immediately. This is really to trigger and restart the countdown notification on the actual device, which is generally recommended for userless devices. And then you've got notify only, where this means download the software update and notify the user, which is typically through the system settings. Now when it comes to install later, again, you're going to download the software and update and install it later. This effectively is slightly different for one of the options, which I'll show you in a second. So as I go through them, you can see you've got the same options. Now I'm going to go through and basically do the download and install for all of them. Except for this last one. So this is where you've got all the updates, the major kind of OS updates and features that might occur. And in here, if you do install later, you get a couple of additional options available to you. So with these next two options, you've effectively got the maximum user deferrals. And if we look at this, this effectively allows the end user to delay when they're going to update it. When you set this, you need to give it the number of times that the end user can defer the update, and basically it will prompt the user once a day. Okay, please note that obviously it's available for devices running version 12 and later. We can also give a priority, right? This is a scheduling priority for downloading and preparing the update. This applies for the minor OS updates, and again there is a limit on what version this will apply to. So we've got two options, low or high. Typically I would use high, particularly if it's quite important you want to push this out. The next two options we have here is we can give a schedule, right? A schedule type. Now, the different schedule types are update and next check-in. As we said, this might be every 8 hours, or we can give update during a scheduled time. And in that case, we can give it, you know, the time zone applicable. But and the same as well if we go for outside of scheduled time, you'll get the same option. But I'm going to go for at check-in, all right, to make it nice and simple. So let's finish this off. I'm just going to put a deferral one in there so we can see this actually working. I'm going to hit the next. Oh, actually, let's go back. Just check, download, install later. I'm actually going to change that back to download and install. Now we can hit the next. I'm going to add my group here. So the group I'm gonna pick here is is part of the included groups. So we're gonna add that group here, and I've got my test device in something called the macOS devices group. So I'll select that. Then I'll hit the next button. I'll review what I've already configured, and then I'll hit the create. So it's added it, it's successfully created it. So at this point, we're going to leave that and we're going to hop back into, we go to devices, and this time we're going to look at the iOS and iPadOS updates. It's slightly different. So we're going to take that a step through that. So update policies for iOS and iPad. I'm going to create a new policy. So we're going to call it iOS because that's what I'm going to be testing here. Hit the next button. And this is different to the macOS update options that you can see. And we're going to go through these. So as you can see, this is seems to be a little bit simpler than the macOS. You've got less options there, and we'll go through them in a sec. But I just want to quickly pop over to the Microsoft website again and highlight a few things. And typically, you need to know that you can use this configuration profile for iOS and iPadOS, but it applies to devices that are supervised. So they've been enrolled, say through Apple Business Manager, into Intune. So take note of that. So these are fully managed, effectively, devices. Also, the feature applies to iOS 10.3 and later, and iPadOS 13 and later. Again, it says supervised there. So there are two different ways of deploying, and what you're going to get is an option to deploy the latest update that's available. Now, if you choose to do that, then that will go through and it will update the device based on a schedule that we'll create. However, if you decide to deploy an older update, you will need to create a device restriction profile. And the reason for that is you want to be able to hide the ability to the end user so they don't see the latest update. So you're going to effectively delay that, so you're forcing a specific version to that device. And we'll see that. We'll have a quick look. So if I go back over to Intune, I got the option to do the latest update, or I can do install, say, 1606, for example. And this will depend on the version that's installed on the device, but if I do that, I will need to do apply a device restriction policy, as it says here. Now, I'm not going to do that in this particular video, but I'm going to go for the latest update. When you go for the scheduled type, you can effectively do update and next check-in, and as we said, that will be effectively every 8 hours that the device does that. Depending on whether you do a manual sync, you can do that outside of those 8 hours, or you can do update during scheduled time. And the scheduled time is effectively you're given a start and end time when that can download and install. The alternative is you can do update outside the scheduled time, and that won't apply until the scheduled time has completed. It's come to its end time. So if I did that, I get the option for the time zone, the start time, and start time and start date, etc. So in my particular example here, I'm just going to go for a next check-in, and then I'm going to hit the next. Again, I'm going to, in the included groups, I'm going to basically, this is for an iOS device, so I'm going to add this to my iPhone users group. So this is my iPhone users, and then I'm going to hit the select. It's going to add it in. It says it affects 2 users, and then I'm going to hit the next here. I get the option to review what I've configured, and then I can hit the create button. And there you have it, it's been created. Right, so although I haven't actually created restriction policy here, I'm going to show you how you would do that. So you go into devices, you pick iOS and iPadOS, you want to go for a configuration profile, create a profile, platform is already selected, you select the type, in this case it's a template, and then we need a device restrictions policy. So we create that. Just going to give it any name for the moment because I'll delete it. And out of all the options available, you want to select the general options. Now there's lots of settings that you can set in here. If you scroll down the page, you'll get to what is the defer software update. So as it says here, this does not impact any schedule updates. It represents days before software updates are visible to end users after release. So you would need to click that onto yes, and then you can give it a day. Now this day is a delay, which delays the default visibility of the update. And this value can be between, I think it's 1 and 90 days. Okay, so up to 90 days you can delay visibility. So that's how you would do that. So let's go back. I'll get rid of that. And I also want to quickly show you how you another option that's available, and that is some software update settings made available through what's called the settings catalog. So if I go into devices, and this is specifically for macOS devices, by the way. So if I go into macOS and then pick the configuration profiles, I create a profile. It's got the platform, and I'm going to set settings catalog. I'll create that. Just going to give it a spurious name for the moment to go through and show you. I want to add some settings here. So if I type in update, we're going to search basically for some available settings, and what we've got here is, say for example, system updates, software updates. Okay, if I select that, I'm going to get a number of options. So I've got 8 results, and these are additional settings that I can make on top of my policy that I've created for my Mac devices. So automatic download, I might want to restrict software update and require admin to install, for example, or allow pre-release installation. So keep note of those. These are some quite good options that you have available, and they might be relevant specifically for when you're trying to either hide or restrict the versions of downloads and updates that you're deploying to your devices. So I'm going to close that because we're not actually going to set any here. And at this point, basically what I'm going to do is go through and test and show these update policies that I've created both for the iOS and for the macOS devices. So let's start with my iPhone here. So over on the right hand side, I'm mirroring my iPhone, and basically you can see that it's notified me. There's a notification come up on the screen to say iOS 16.06 is available. Now I can install that now, later, or click the details. So the other thing I can check here is if I go into settings of the device and then into general and then software update, I can see that it's showing the version that's been downloaded, and basically it's ready for an install now. But if I did set a restriction, you would see a notice to say that this is the latest version that's allowed by your company. So there would be some information on the screen and you wouldn't see the latest available 1606 option. So that's the difference if you were putting a restriction on here. Finally, when it comes to the macOS update and the testing of that, I want to show you three things. So if I go into devices, I'm going to actually show you my device first. This is Andy's Mac Studio. It's actually the device that I'm doing this recording on, and you can see that it's corporate owned, is compliant, etc. Now if I quickly look back at the actual policy, the update policy, I'll go into devices again, macOS, and update policies for Mac. This was the policy we set up. And the thing I want to highlight here is that the schedule type is update and next check-in. So there's no time zone or time of day that we've actually configured here. And what that actually means is as long as the download has happened, it can install at any point. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is, because this is the device I'm doing the recording on, if you go into system settings of the Mac and then you go into general and then select software update, it should do a check and then it come back with some information. And here we can see that there is an update available, so it's Ventura 13.5.1. Okay, I can do that update now if I choose to, but the important thing I just want to highlight is it's showing the automatic updates for this Mac are managed by Contoso. So that's telling me that the management policy is installed and it's working on this particular device. Now the last thing I want to show is you can actually see the devices through Intune that, where the OS updates have been targeted. If you go into devices, then monitor, there is an option for installation status for Mac OS devices. And this is where it's going to show you where the devices, the OS updates are targeted for relevant devices. In my case, a Mac OS device, so Mac Studio. Now there's a warning sign against that, so we'll click into that and just see what that's about. So you can see that we've got critical configuration of firmware, they're up to date, but there is an other, which if you remember is the OS and app updates, and it's showing that if I click on that, it's showing that it's idle. Effectively it's telling me it's ready to do the update. Now if you remember, if we back in here, the software updates, it's showing that there we've got this updates available, but also it's saying security updates only. Now if I click on the information button here, it gives you more information. It will tell you automatically which updates will apply, and in this case install macOS updates hasn't been switched on. Okay, so this is why you will see certain things will install automatically and certain things won't. And if you remember, we didn't set our policy to install immediately, so the device will need to do a check-in to get the download and another check-in effectively to do the installation. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this is giving you the background you need to configure your OS upgrades on your iOS and macOS devices. Please like and subscribe, and if you have any comments, please send them to us and we'll get back to you. Thanks very much.